Hi guys, welcome back. Eric's UK here with another vid. Hope you weren't too scared by that. I'm going to do a new series where I talk about certain fantasy creatures. It's just an idea that came to me. I thought it might be interesting. And today, because we're on the approach to Halloween 2020, I thought we could do a little bit of a chat about the undead. Okay, so for me, my experiences mainly with fantasy role-playing have been D&D and Pathfinder, so they will be the games I will reference. Also for me, I split undead into two categories. That of undead and the unliving. So what's the difference? To me, the undead is a much larger category. It ranges from anything like your animated skeletons and zombies through to ghouls, liches, vampires, ghosts, wraiths. Things that were once living people. Things that have been animated, things that have been turned, ghouls, vampires, things like that, where you have become one of the undead. Things like liches, where you do it to yourself to extend your lifespan, and things like ghosts and wraiths and ethereal undead like that, which are still the soul of the individual. They just haven't moved on to their gods because of whatever reason, something that is tying them to the mortal realm. The unliving, however, is a different category. The unliving are things that were never alive to begin with, but are still classed by the game system as the undead. Two examples for this from D&D and Pathfinder are Devourers and Caller in Darkness. For those that don't know, a Devourer is a kind of large, ogre sort of sized, emaciated humanoid shape with an exposed ribcage, and within this ribcage are howling, gibbering, screaming souls of its victims, which it slowly devours. In itself is not a living being, it is undead, but it was never a living creature to start with. It wasn't a person, it has always existed in this form. A Caller in Darkness was an entity that first appeared in Dark Sun in the early 90s, which in that instance is slightly different because it was kind of an amalgamation, a gestalt, if you were, of psychic individuals who had died and their minds sort of combined into this thing. Since then, the creature has changed because obviously we use it outside of that setting. And a Caller in Darkness is basically an entity, a spiritual being that is made up of the manifestation, I suppose is the right word, of fear and terror of a group of individuals. So it's kind of a unliving miasma. It's not the actual combination of souls of the living, or recently living, or however you want to word it. It's now just an entity, a manifestation of a situation or emotional response. So some people might say, well, that's still undead because it still comes from people. So yeah, you're right, but at the same time, it's in itself is not the spirit or spirits of those people. And while games generally don't differentiate between the two, I kind of, as a GM, want to differentiate between the two. I don't make any game mechanics out of it, but I try and make a point in my world building that this is what they are. How they come into being, well, that's a kind of different thing entirely, because, you know, why are they undead if they weren't living? Anyway, we're wobbling a bit. It is one of those cyclical things you can go round and round and round. So question one is, do you differentiate between the two? And if so, how do you do it? How do your game worlds handle the fact, if they bother, that there are actual undead and there are unliving? The second topic, I think, is a little bit more interesting. Just like dragons, orcs, goblins, the existence of gods and angels and the like, undead are a real thing in the mortal realm. They do exist. People know this. It's not like in the real world where people say ghosts exist, or they might believe that ghosts exist, but we never have any 100% concrete evidence, so there's always that up in the air. But your general farmer in the Forgotten Realms or Galarian or wherever your world is knows for a fact that ghosts and vampires and other undead beasties exist. So how do you deal with that? You know, obviously these people do not go through their lives absolutely terrified, knowing that these things are out there. It's just part of the world. But surely you want to stop people, your loved ones, your villagers, your neighbours from rising from the grave once again when they pass away. And I've seen lots of discussions where people have said, well, you wouldn't bury your dead. You wouldn't actually inter them in the ground or in a crypt or what have you. You would burn them. You would cremate them. You would get rid of the body, stop it coming back. And that always seems a bit of a cop-out to me. Because I think even if in the real world we knew that the undead were real, we'd still bury people. It's what you do. It's tradition. It's... I guess in a way it kind of makes sense. It's going back to the earth. And let's be honest, out of hundreds of thousands of people out there, how many of them are actually going to rise again from the grave? You could always, if you were rich enough, probably have a tomb and make sure that it was a big metal door so that if you did rise from the dead, you weren't coming out again. But you do have this point, has been made, that you could cremate your dead. The problem I have with that, I suppose in a game world sense and as a GM sense, is I just want to say, well, do you want flaming ghost spirits? Because that's how you get flaming, angry, vengeful ghost spirits. You know, if this person is going to come back from the dead, probably as a ghost or a spectre or something like that, the last thing you want is for them to come back as a fiery vengeance spirit. So would you really want to do that? All right, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's to make the point. I don't think there's any way round how you could do it, because you either have to bury people or you burn them or you entomb them, or you have to open dimensional portals and throw their body onto the other side and let it be someone else's problem. But that's not an issue that can be really resolved by your everyday commoner. But that raises question two then. In your game world, how do you handle the burial details? Are people buried? Are they cremated? Do they do something else? I mean, we have a history of, especially in Eastern Europe, I think, without sounding cliche, of finding coffins with the remains of people nailed to their coffins so they can't climb out again. You know, from superstitions of vampires and worse. People buried face down so that they couldn't push themselves or claw themselves out of the ground. So, yeah, I'd be interested in how your game worlds handle things like burial details. How do they prevent the dead from coming back if they are so concerned about it? I think undead, for me, are one of the more interesting sort of creatures in fantasy role-playing games. Mainly because they are beyond the regular orc and goblin. They are not dragons, which we expect. They're something a little bit more terrifying. Although the game systems generally make them far too easy to deal with, I think. But what are your thoughts on the undead in fantasy role-playing, or even in science fiction role-playing, if your game handles that? You know, a haunted starship or something like that. Anyway, this video is dragging on a little bit. Thank you for listening to my waffles. I look forward to seeing your responses. Until next time, take care, guys, and good gaming.